this video, we're going to look at Chapter 5, which is about working as an Spsv operator. And we'll be looking at things such as vehicle requirements briefly, because that's been covered in the previous chapter, operating an Spsv owned by another person, renting an Spsv, maintaining operational data, which is a very fancy way of just keeping records of your day-to-day activities, the rules of operation for each category of taxi, the use of taxi ranks, the use of bus lanes by taxis, using your roof sign, refusing a passenger, keeping your vehicle in good condition, compliance and enforcement, fixed payment offences, demerits, and finally we'll be looking at changing address or contact details on a licence. Now, briefly, vehicle requirements. It was comprehensively covered in the last presentation. There's no need to repeat it. When it comes to tamper-proof licence discs, they do include the vehicle licence number and expiry date, the vehicle registration number, the colour and type of vehicle, and how many passengers that vehicle can carry. It's yellow for taxis and wheelchair accessible taxis, the tamper-proof disc. Blue for hackneys, wheelchair hackneys and local area hackneys. Silver for a limousine. Now, when it comes to removing and disposing of tamper-proof licence discs, they're very important. They're kind of a gold standard seal of approval almost. And to therefore prevent their unlawful use on unlicensed vehicles, only licensing inspectors may ordinarily remove and dispose of them. There are a number of circumstances where you may have to arrange the removal yourself. For example, changing the vehicle associated with your license to a different vehicle. Okay, the discs cannot be used on another vehicle. Having your windscreen replaced, selling or disposing of your vehicle. Surrendering your license. Tamper-proof discs are not reusable. It is an offence to remove the disc for use on another vehicle. So it's like an NCT cert or something. They're associated to that particular vehicle. For any licensing transaction that involves the issue of new tamper-proof discs, you must return the old discs when presenting your vehicle for inspection, or provide documentary evidence that the discs have been destroyed securely. Now, you need a report from the Garda or an insurance company, because these are very important and they can't be faked. They're a passport, so to speak. Now, if a person is operating a taxi owned by another person, the holder of the vehicle license can permit the vehicle to be operated by any licensed driver. Okay, and it is important that the holder of a local area hackney driver license may not drive any taxi except a local area hackney. The vehicle license holder must ensure that the person driving is fully licensed to drive the vehicle, provide and maintain appropriate Spsv insurance, keep a record of the name, address, contact number of each person driving the taxi and their taxi driver license details. Retain these records and make them available for inspection by the authority on request. An SPS driver who is operating a vehicle owned by someone else as an Spsv must make sure that the vehicle license is in date, the vehicle is roadworthy, the vehicle is appropriately insured, the vehicle complies fully with the relevant regulations. Now, renting an Spsv. Now, just to say, it's the responsibility of the Spsv owner and the prospective driver to make sure that all the regulations are in place, because both can be held accountable. It's like anything. It's like borrowing a car from somebody. The insurance, the tax, it's the responsibility of the owner and the driver. It's the same for the Spsv. Okay, and this is what they mean by maintaining operational data as well, keeping a record of who's driving it and when. Now, when it comes to renting an Spsv, a license holder, the regulations allow him to rent the vehicle to another person. The person providing the rental must own the vehicle, be the holder of the vehicle license, and provide the correct insurance for the period of the rental. The rental of an Spsv license only is not permitted. The person providing the rental must notify the authority. They must provide the authority with details of the period of the arrangement, the renter's Spsv driver licence and the vehicle reg number. And they must maintain a record of the vehicle licence associated with the rental agreement. It's the same stringent regulations in terms of licence propriety. Maintaining operational data. Again, the NTA maintain a database of links between each licensed vehicle and its current driver. And it's the driver's responsibility to ensure this information is current at all times by informing the authority whenever they take over the operation of an Spsv. Okay, so it's like the authority need to know where the taxi is and who has been driven by. If you own and operate only one vehicle and that vehicle is never operated by anyone else, you need to notify the NTA only once in relation to that vehicle. If a vehicle is operated by more than one driver, each driver must notify the NTA each and every time they commence operating that vehicle. So the regulations are quite strict. If you're a sole trader, you can notify them once. But if vehicles are chopping and changing between drivers, the NTA must be notified. And of course, they have the infrastructure in place to do that. You can do it by using the authority's Spsv online services system, the authority's industry app, the information line, or a text service. Now, let's look at rules of operation. Now, Spsvs, taxis, may be hired only when standing in an official rank or while plying for hire on the street or via pre-booking. 3 ways: rank, plying for hire on the street, pre-booking. They can stand at a taxi rank, but only when available for hire. It's not a parking space. Can use the width flow bus lanes when operating as an Spsv. They must use the verified calibrated taximeter, okay, where they charge that amount or a lesser amount if agreed. The taximeter must be operated on all journeys. They can't charge more than the national maximum taxi fare. A receipt must be provided. The approved branding on the front door of the vehicle and regulation roof sign. The national taxi fare sticker must be displayed in the front of the vehicle. The in-vehicle information card in the rear. A driver should not leave a taxi unattended at a taxi rank. The driver, again, must keep a record of all bookings. Okay, so these are largely common sense. The driver, of course, must notify the authority each time they take over the operation of a vehicle. Now, wheelchair taxis, again, they must adhere to what we've just spoken about. They must have the specialist equipment. They must have the accessibility symbol displayed on the roof sign, and of course accommodate at least one person seated in their wheelchair and at least one other passenger at the same time. It's repetitive. We had this in the last chapter. That's the National Transport Authority for that. They like to repeat themselves. And of course, being a wheelchair taxi, you must give priority to bookings for people with disabilities. And again, keep a record of all bookings. Hackneys, the fare to be charged, the fare will be agreed in advance. There's no meter. A written receipt must be made available to the customer. Must be pre-booked. Must, from the time of receipt of the notification to the completion of the hire, carry a document in a vehicle showing the following: details of the booking, the name of the hirer, the starting point and destination, the fare agreed. They're not permitted to use bus lanes, not permitted to display signs or ads, except as prescribed by the authority. The driver must notify the authority each time they take over the operation of a vehicle. Wheelchair hackneys, again, set out the rules as we've already mentioned. Specialist equipment, one person in the wheelchair, one passenger at the same time. Accessibility symbol on the passenger door, again, priority for people with disabilities. Keep a record of all bookings. Local area hackneys. Rules for hackneys apply, as we've spoken about. The area of operation is specified on the local area hackney licence, and licence holders must not provide or advertise the provision of hackney services outside the area specified. Limousines, again, the rules for hackneys apply in terms of information, with the exception when engaged as part of a wedding or a funeral. That requirement to carry a document showing details of the booking is not important. Now, the use of taxi ranks. So the local authorities, in consultation with An Garda, are responsible for planning the location of taxi ranks, deciding on their size, their hours of operation, building and maintaining them, and managing their use. The authorities' role is limited to offering advice and guidelines to the local authorities. The local authorities are the final arbiter. Some taxi ranks are in operation permanently and full-time, some only at certain times of the day, and some only temporarily to provide service, for example, at a public event such as a concert. Some ranks are provided by other bodies on their own premises, such as airports. For some of these ranks, drivers are required to obtain a permit. They'll pay a fee, and that allows them to stand for hire at the rank. Obviously, Dublin Airport, Cork Airport are lucrative ranks. Taxis standing at an official taxi rank must be available for hire. They should not leave a taxi unattended at a taxi rank. Drivers shouldn't. Customers have a right to choose which taxi they hire. They do not necessarily have to hire the first taxi in the queue. A taxi may be hailed and hired by a customer in close proximity to a taxi rank. Hackneys and limousines cannot stand at a taxi rank. And of course, no extra charge is payable by customers for hiring a taxi from a rank. Use of bus lanes by taxis. So the Road Traffic Regulations Act 1997 allows taxis in the course of their business to use the normal with flow bus lanes. Okay, so a taxi can use a with flow bus lane only while it's operating as a taxi, carrying a passenger on the way to pick up a pre-booked passenger or plying for hire. Taxis must not use bus lanes if they are not operating as an Spsv. For example, driving home at the end of a shift, travelling on personal business, or transporting only goods and not passengers. Taxis cannot use contraflow bus lanes. They're bus lanes for scheduled services. The traffic travels in the opposite direction, and under any circumstances can they be used by taxis, or indeed any traffic, any non-bus traffic. Hackneys and limousines, to repeat, are not permitted to use bus lanes. The roof sign, you must have it in place when operating a taxi or wheelchair taxi. You must remove it when the vehicle is in a public area not being operated as a taxi. Keep the roof lights switched on when your vehicle is available for hire and switched off when not available. There's no requirement to link the taxi roof sign light to the meter. Each can be switched on and off independently. If you're on a journey of 30 kilometres that takes you outside the urban limits, you may, with the prior consent of the passenger, position the roof sign lengthways for more efficient fuel consumption. Again, this is repetitive. At least we'll know it because they're repeating what's been said in the previous chapter. And I'm inclined not to deviate too much from what's in the chapter. Okay, refusing a passenger. So there are circumstances in which a taxi driver can legitimately refuse to accept a passenger. They can ask them to leave the vehicle or refuse to follow a passenger's instructions. These circumstances include a request to take the passenger on a journey of over 30 kilometres, a passenger who becomes disorderly or abusive or offensive, a passenger who is consuming food or drink, a passenger who is likely to soil or damage the vehicle, a passenger with too much luggage to be carried safely in the interior of a vehicle, whose luggage poses a danger to drivers or others, a group of passengers who wish to travel together but would not but together would exceed the legal capacity. A passenger who asks the driver to put his health or safety at risk, for example, by asking the driver to lift an unreasonably heavy load. A passenger under the age of 17 but of adult size who refuses to wear a seatbelt. A small child who, in the driver's judgment, may not be carried safely in the vehicle. A passenger who refuses to show ability to pay the fare when asked, or who refuses to pay a reasonable deposit. A person attempting to hire the vehicle for the transport of goods without an accompanying passenger. A passenger or an intending passenger who won't put out a cigarette. And when a dispute or where a dispute arises, you must keep a record of the event by writing down the details so you can explain the circumstances to the authorities' compliance officers if a complaint follows a refusal of service. Now, the next section deals about keeping a vehicle in good condition. And to be honest with you, it's whether a person, any sensible car owner, and we all are going to follow these rules. This is a typical AA vehicle. Check your tyres, your lights and mirrors, oil, windscreen wipers, battery and warning lights. The NCTs come around every 12 months. We're across all these things. And then fluid levels, checking fluid levels, brake fluid, battery terminals and cables, hoses and belts, replace if damaged, brakes, handbrakes, check that the horn is working, the exhaust system, emission controls. All this is common sense stuff, and the car that's been brought to the garage regularly, all these things are going to be spotted and dealt with, especially before an NCT. Shock absorbers and stuff like that, all the usual items, they are mentioned here in this chapter, so I'm just reminding you of them. Okay. Now, compliance and enforcement. So the authority is committed to ensuring compliance with Spsv regulations, essentially to ensure that legitimate professional operators do not have to compete with fly-by-nights, sharks, sharp practice operators. That's essentially what it's about. This is what this regulation is all about, essentially, to ensure that there's an efficient service, so it's regulated and policed. Okay, the authority is a team of compliance officers who are empowered to investigate complaints or reports of non-compliance in all aspects of the industry, including vehicle standards, driver behaviour and identification, and issues relating to bookings and fares. The authority has the right to prosecute for certain offences, including licensed, unlicensed drivers and unlicensed vehicles. Compliance officers may also issue on-the-spot penalties for a number of specified fixed payment offences. Now, as a driver, if you are approached by a compliance officer, you can expect the officer to identify themselves and show you their warrant of appointment identity card. You can expect them to be polite and civil, understand that you are working and not delay you, check compliance with basic vehicle standards, tamper-proof license discs, in-vehicle passenger information, safety equipment, cleanliness, the roof sign, taxi meter, printer and wheelchair ramps. They can check that the driver display card is on display and the driver is in possession of his or her own ID card, and that the fare information is displayed in the taxi. Now, the mandatory area knowledge test. The National Transport Authority may request a licence holder to provide evidence that he or she has adequate knowledge of the area in which they are operating. If the NTA received 3 or more complaints relating to your knowledge of the area in which you are operating during the previous 3 years, the authority may require you to sit and pass the relevant area knowledge test prior to renewing your licence. Now, I mean, they have to watch out for spurious and specious complaints, It's hard to get the data on how often this happens, but, I think it would be rare, especially now given that new licence holders have to pass an area knowledge test. Okay, just I have there a quick picture of a spreadsheet of all the fines. I have them in numerical order, differently to how they're displayed in the chapter in the book. So you can see the fines there that attract 40 quid of a payment, 60 quid, 80 quid, and 250. Okay, so the 252 ones, like, so failure on front door signs for taxi, wheelchair taxi, or a meter calibration discrepancy can attract a fine of 250. Looking at the 40 quid ones, roof sign rules, not notifying details of the Spsv, not displaying in-vehicle info, 40 quid. Refusing a guide dog, failure to provide a receipt, these are €40 fines. Failure to display driver ID, and so on. We can run a test on those at some stage in our class. Okay. Now, so the fixed payment specifies the amount of the penalty which you must pay in order to avoid prosecution. So within 28 days of the notice, you can pay the amount specified, or within 50 days, 6 days, I should say, of the date, you can pay the amount specified in the notice plus an additional 50%. So if it's a €40 fine, if you leave it to the 56th day, you've got to pay 60 quid. Okay. However, if you do not pay within 56 days of the date of the notice, court proceedings are initiated. So it's like everything, get it done within the 28 days. Demerits. So demerits, what are demerits? So a demerit really would be, it's a punishment really, so it depends on the offence. So the NTA can decide to apply a demerit to a person's licence. It's like a strike, 3 strikes in a row. Well, in this case, it's 8 demerits. If it's 8 demerits are accumulated on a licence, the holder will be disqualified for a period of 3 months. Okay, so I think it would take a lot now to build up 8 demerits. Finally, changing details. When it comes to change of address, you are required to inform the NTA, address, mobile number or email. Inform the authority, because this will ensure that you receive updates from the authority regarding your licence, and they're not going to take any responsibility if you don't receive correspondence because you haven't registered a change of contact details. And finally, holders of taxi driver licenses are also obliged to inform the guards when they change address. Now, when it comes to other occupation, if you hold an Spsv driver license and you become engaged in another occupation, you are required to give on Garda Síochána details of that occupation, including name and address of the employer, if it's relevant, you're not self-employed. And if that other occupation involves driving, evidence that you've informed the employer that you hold an Spsv driver license and that you drive an Spsv for hire or reward. It's important. It's to be transparent. Control of the company. So if a license is held by a company and control of the company changes, the license is revoked automatically. The company must inform the authority of the change in control and return the license with the notification within 14 days of change in control. Now, this requirement does not apply when change in control of the company arises from the death of a member of the company. And finally, changes to the national maximum taxi fare. If taxi fare changes, the taximeter in an Spsv must be reprogrammed with the new fare structure within 90 days prior to the fare change coming into effect. And the taximeter again must be verified by the legal metrology service. So that's chapter 5, a little bit repetitive. There's not a lot of information that I would worry that you won't be able to retain and recall with these. So I hope to talk soon. Take care, everybody.